Every day, above and beyond our existing lawful admission programs, roughly 1,500 to 2,000 people try crossing our borders illegally. We do a very good job considering the laws are so bad. They're not archaic. They're incompetent. It's not that they're old. They're just bad. And we can't get any Democrat votes to change them. It's only the Republicans that are in unison. They want to change them. They want to make strong borders, want to get rid of any crime.
The president also had a warning for any migrants who try to break through the border like some did on their way into Mexico.
They're throwing rocks viciously and violently. You saw that 3 days ago, really hurting the military. We're not going to put up with that. They want to throw rocks at our military fights back. We're going to consider, and I told them, consider it a rifle. When they throw rocks like they did at the Mexico military and police, I say, consider it a rifle.
Well, there you go. Just moments ago, Trish Regan asked Vice President Pence about the border situation, and he placed the blame squarely on Democrats. Watch.
I think in many ways today's Democratic Party is much more liberal than the Democratic Party of 20 years ago. I mean, you know that even early in his career, President Obama, called for secure borders, said we can't have people just coming into our country illegally, and yet really theirs is a party of open borders.
Now, of course, mixed into all of this is the birthright citizenship debate that the president injected into the midterms this week. So is immigration a winning issue for Republicans in the closing days of the campaign? Joining me now, Great American PAC senior strategist and former Trump campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, who is also the author of the forthcoming book, Trump's Enemies, How the Deep State is Undermining the Presidency. Welcome back, Corey.
Thanks for having me.
So how careful does the president have to be in capitalizing on immigration before the midterms, which are just 5 days away? How far is too far when he's talking about it?
Well, I think when you're talking about the safety and security of the American people, there is no place that is too far to go. The president's job, first and foremost, above everything else, is to keep the American people safe from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And having thousands of people marching on our border, deciding that they're going to come to our country when they think that it's the right thing to do. See, there is a process if these people are political refugees. They could have stopped in Mexico and sought asylum from the political side of this, but that's not what they're doing. They've decided now, and the president has responded. And this is a president who's been very clear. If you come to our country illegally, there will be a recourse, and the American people agree with him. We are the only country in the world that this is even a discussion point. Can you imagine for 1 second if a caravan was traveling up to Israel and was trying to walk through the borders of Israel? It would never happen. It wouldn't even be a discussion. We take in 1 million immigrants a year, more than any other country in the world. We're a very gracious country. We have a big heart. But you have to do it properly. And this is an issue that the American people agree with the president on.
So Vice President Pence says that the responsibility lands squarely on the shoulders of Democrats, because Democrats obviously chose to tackle health care when they had the triumvirate, as Republicans do now. Republicans tackled health care and they failed. So when and how are you going to see two parties come together to actually make immigration more understandable for people who live here and for people who are coming here to try and work and live legally?
Well, to follow up on what Vice President Pence said, he was right that there was a time not that long ago where Democrats wanted to make sure we had strong borders, and Hillary Clinton actually voted for funding for a fence on the southern border. It was a bipartisan issue. But in the world of the hyper-partisan politics of Washington, D.C. right now, Democrats don't want to do that. And this president, if you remember what he did last year, was said, I will provide a path to citizenship for those individuals who are in the country through no fault of their own. A lot of conservatives cringed on that, giving those dreamers a path to citizenship. But in order to do that, in order to get that path, he wanted full funding for the wall. The Democrats don't want to solve the problem. What they want to do is politicize this problem, because this president has extended the olive branch that they haven't wanted. And we've seen on the Senate floor what Harry Reid, the former majority leader, has said. He said that birthright citizenship is not what it is meant to be in the Constitution as it's currently written, and now all of a sudden people are surprised that Donald Trump has rekindled this discussion. This is what Harry Reid was talking about not that long ago when he was in the U.S. Senate and became the Senate Majority Leader.
I want to talk. Okay, Corey, I want to talk a little bit about that since you bring up birthright citizenship. The president said he's going to tackle it with executive order, and I've been talking about this all week. I was very critical of President Obama crafting immigration policy through executive order. I think it's something that's very easy to undo with the next administration, which only leads to more chaos and confusion. The way to go about it is obviously either to amend the Constitution, which would be nearly impossible in this day and age, or have some sort of a legislative fix. That is going to be very difficult if Republicans maintain the Senate and Democrats have the House. What could they possibly do together if you do have split chambers on this very issue?
Well, I think what you'll actually see is if the president does issue an executive order as it relates to birthright citizenship, I am certain a federal judge in some court, whether it's the 9th or the 4th or somewhere, is going to immediately put a stay on that. And I'm sure the White House has thought through the legal ramifications and feels probably strongly that they could take this issue to the Supreme Court and have a strong standing on it. But look, where we really are, Kenny, and I agree with you, our elected officials that we send to Washington, D.C. need to do a better job to represent what the American people want, which is a safe and secure country from people coming in and killing Americans. Nobody wants that. So why don't we come together and agree that we fund the wall on the southern border, just like many other countries have. They have walls, and we have a process to come into the country. And if that means we look at what is called merit-based immigration, like Canada does or like Australia does, then we can do that. But that has to be done legislatively, because you're exactly right. When President Trump leaves office in 6.5 years and we have a different person, that can all be undone through an executive order, and the American people deserve better.
All right, Corey Lewandowski, thank you so much.